Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll be getting started in a minute or two. We're just going to wait for a few folks to join us. So just hold tight. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Today's webinar is Back to the Office, Strategies for Post-Pandemic Work Environments. I'm Eric Engineer, a partner at S3 Ventures. We're one of the largest venture capital firms focused on Texas-based tech startups. And I am very excited about today's topic because it seems like every board meeting that I go into, or if I talk to other folks in the industry, they're all thinking about what it means to go back into the office. Everyone started to do that over the last few months, and it seems like different companies are settling on different strategies. It's all over the map, and it doesn't seem like there's one right answer. So we were excited to gather a great panel today to talk about this topic and provide some viewpoints from the real world. And so excited that we were able to assemble everyone here today. Before we jump in, I did want to do a little bit of this kind of housekeeping. So from a logistics standpoint, this is a Zoom webinar, so everyone is in listen-only mode other than the panelists. We would love for you to submit questions. We do want this to be interactive to the extent possible. So you should see a Q&A button on your screen there. Feel free to pose questions through that. We will be monitoring that throughout. And if there are questions that are relevant to what we're talking about, I may interject and ask them on the spot. Otherwise, we may leave them for the end. We will also be doing some polling throughout and to make this interactive. So you will see a screen pop up once in a while asking you to answer some questions, and we'll be sharing the results of those poll questions as well to add to the conversation. And of course, the recording we are going to be recording this webinar, and it will be emailed to anyone who registered later this week. So if you missed some of it, you'll be able to see the whole thing, or if you want to share it with a friend, you can do that as well. So let's now move on to our agenda here. We're going to start with some introductions. I want to make sure each of our panelists has an opportunity to give you a little bit of background on who they are and what they're doing as it relates to getting back into the office. Then we'll be digging into specifically working from home policies as it relates to getting back into the office. It seems like even if you are trying to get everyone there, there has to be some sort of policy related to that. And we'll be digging into that. And then we'll also be looking at just what are the kind of space planning decisions that people have to make if they are going to be making the decision to rent out office space. What's the latest data? What are the trends that are available or that are kind of occurring in our local Austin and Texas markets? And then again, if we have some additional Q&A that we don't get to during those topics, we'll open it up to the group as time allows. So that's our agenda. And and advance to the next slide here. So we've assembled a great panel today. We have first Tim Herman. He's CEO and co-founder of UpEquity. They're an S3 Ventures portfolio company. We have Yael Katz, also CEO and co-founder of a company, BrainCheck, that's in our portfolio. And then we have Scott, who's a partner of Elevate Growth Partners. They're commercial real estate experts with a special focus on the Austin and the Texas markets. So that they have some really interesting insights. And so to get started, I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to provide a short description of your company, what you do, how many employees you have, where they're generally located. So we just get to have a sense of kind of the organization, and then kind of, you know, how you're approaching the office, work from home kind of choice there. So maybe we'll start with you, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So as Eric mentioned, I'm Tim Herman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of UpEquity. At UpEquity, our mission is to create more equal access to the American dream. The way that we do that is by enabling home buyers to make all cash offers, even if they need a mortgage, right? So our mission is to create more equal access to the American dream, and we're doing that through frictionless and on-demand home buying. I think the questions that you asked, we have 85 people 99% of us are in Austin, Texas, and we are essentially completely in the office. We have gone to a work from home Wednesday, which I'm sure that we'll get into later. But yeah, the TLDR is 85 people in Austin helping people make cash offers on homes.
Great, thanks, Tim. Yael, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Yael Katz. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BrainCheck. We deal with a very unhappy topic, which is that of cognitive impairment. So if somebody is worried that they're not able to think clearly or remember things due to dementia or any other reason, and they go to the doctor needs to conduct an assessment to determine whether or not that's real or not, why might they be having an impairment and so forth, and then also manage their impairment. So we create technology products. It's in a category called software as a medical device that we sell into practices, into physician practices, and then also healthcare systems to help doctors rapidly and reliably assess cognitive health at the point of care, and then also manage patients. So we have right around, I want to say 55 employees, something like that. And we're actually split between two locations within Texas, Houston and Austin. It's probably a third in Houston, 2/3 in Austin at this point. And we have a smattering of people elsewhere, but that's definitely the exception. And we have, I think, an interesting return to office policy. So because there are two locations, we have basically 2 days where people are in office in each location. So in Houston, everyone comes in on Monday and Thursday, and in Austin, everyone comes in on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm in both places, so it's about 2.5-hour drive. And we were pretty innovative, I think, in bringing people back from the pandemic. So early on, this was kind of unusual. And now I think there's a lot more return to office. And so it's working well for us.
Great.
And look forward to talking more.
Yeah, we'll dig into that a little bit more. Thank you, Yael. That's great. Scott, you want to just give a high level of Elevate?
Yeah, sure. You got it. I'm Scott Studzinski. I'm a partner at Elevate Growth Partners. We're a Austin-based tech-enabled commercial real estate firm, and we focus on finding spaces for our tech clients that inspire them and help them increase productivity. We deal with a lot of young startups here in town, as well as tech companies that have matured, and the spectrum of their needs certainly different as they grow and look to raise money versus companies that have a more mature workforce. And I'll jump into that later. But we have 10 brokers here in town. Work from home was very prevalent during the first year of COVID. But most of us are not only employees, but 1099 contractors. And so, our business is being out in the market and either meeting with entrepreneurs or showing space or keeping up to date with the latest market trends and getting early looks at spaces that might be coming available. So, we can jump into that as well. Again, we're growing like the rest of the city is growing, and the demographics in Austin are just unbelievable for real estate. And despite the fact that the Fed has increased rates, there's still a lot of activity and a lot of construction happening, not only in Texas, but specifically in Austin.
Great, Scott. Yeah, I'm really happy to have you on the panel because you'll be able to kind of provide kind of that kind of broader view of what's happening across the whole ecosystem. So excited to hear more. So I thought we would start with just a panel. Poll. We heard from our panel in terms of who they are, but it'd be always nice to hear who's in the audience. So you should be seeing a poll appearing in front of you shortly, which asks you to describe your role within your organization, and the options are CEO, founder, finance, HR, or somewhere in operations. That could be sales, marketing, product, engineering, or other. So we'll wait just a few seconds here so everyone has a chance to answer the question. Again, it is what best describes your role. So I think that's probably enough time for folks to answer that. And maybe we can now look at the results of that. So that should be appearing for all of us shortly. And it looks like, oh, okay, wow. More than expected. So about a third of the folks here are CEO founders. So that's wonderful to see here. That really means people who are kind of leading their organizations at the top and trying to make some hard decisions. And of course, as I expect, some good finance, HR, and operation mix as well. Well, that's good for all of us on the panel here to understand who our audience is. We're going to kind of dig into this first topic, like I said, working from home policies, and obviously every policy has impacts here. You know, it's been interesting just to tee things off. I just wanted to share just kind of some interesting facts and observations, because I think we've all seen that there are companies kind of all over the spectrum on this topic. You know, they're famously companies like GitLab that are fully remote and don't have offices to begin with. And then there are folks who are really trying to genuinely have some sort of office presence. And even there's just so much variation. You know, for those of us here in Austin, we always hear about what Elon Musk is doing as of late. And I think got a lot of headlines for Tesla employees needing to be back in the office 5 days a week. You know, on the other end of the spectrum, you know, you have folks like Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, who says that their employees can work from anywhere in the world, wherever they like, as long as that could be at home or if they could be at an Airbnb office of their choosing. So it's total flexibility. I also read this interesting kind of Gallup poll that found that about half of jobs are remote capable. And of those, you know, 20% of people are planning on going back to the office all the time, 40% hybrid, 40% home. So again, just a lot of variation. And then the thing that was kind of interesting that kind of hit home, I think some of you on the webinar probably saw this also, was that in May, the Wall Street Journal reported that Austin is #1 among large metros for returning to the office. And this was a couple months ago, but you know, over 60% kind of folks had returned, whereas you know at the trough it was 22%. So kind of gone up from 22% to 60% here in Austin. And that is still well ahead of other cities, especially in the Northeast, where you know they're like 30–40% still. So we're definitely leading the way here in Texas in terms of trying to get back into the office. And really would love to kind of have each of you now speak a little bit about that. But before we do that, I thought it'd be fun to also have another poll, just so we can hear what the audience is doing. And so we'll pull that up here. And the question here for everyone is, how often do you expect employees in your organization to be at a physical office at minimum? So, you know, if you're going to be setting some sort of policy or there's some sort of cultural expectation about that, you know, what do you expect to be seen here? And so this is going to be a little bit of like a histogram, everything from 5 days a week down to 1 day a week. Or there might be, you know, might have a policy where it's completely ad hoc up to the employee, or you might be one of those companies that has decided we're never going to have an office again, we're going to be fully virtual. So those are your options. Hopefully that's given enough time for everyone to answer that. And so maybe we can now switch over to the results there. All right. Wow, interesting. So, you know, I think it looks like here, you know, we have 8% for 5 days a week, 13% for 4 days, 23% for 3 days, 20% for 2 days, and 3% for 1 day. So there's a clustering, it seems, on that 2 to 3 days a week, which is, I think, similar to what Yael is doing. And then a good 30% up to the employer ad hoc. I think that'll be interesting to see the impacts of that kind of policy. And then only 5% fully virtual or no office. So that's good for you, Scott. People are still going to be taking down space. So we will like move now to kind of, let's talk about that, what we just saw, and just kind of general kind of reactions to kind of how people are approaching this. I thought it might be interesting to start by having each of you just speak about kind of how you approached the decision with your leadership team, what you considered when you made the decision for your policy, what you've learned so far along that journey, you know, kind of both, you know, intended and unintended consequences, if you will. So Yael, maybe you could start. You mentioned that you're 2 office days a week in 2 different offices. So if you could just tell us a little bit about that journey to get to that point.
Sure. I think that people are not necessarily that great at self-reporting, whether they would like to be in an office or not. And what I found when I ask employees for feedback, which I do very often, is that they vacillated quite a bit in terms of what they said they wanted. And it was really all over the map. And made the decision to come back to office And what was apparent right after doing that was like so many people came over and thanked me. And they said, oh my God, we were home for so long. I was worried about, did I lose my social skills and ability to interact with people? And like, thank you for doing that. And they were really grateful to have the option of to have an office to go to. And I think that after, well, I guess you asked how we made the decision. Mm-hmm. So I made the decision unilaterally after collecting feedback and trying to kind of make sense of it and just being like, wow, like everybody's opinions all over. I'm just going to kind of pick something and go with it. Mm-hmm. And it was clear right away that it was bringing people back to the office in some capacity was a benefit to people. And we've always been very flexible. If somebody needed to stay home for a particular reason, or I don't know if they were planning to visit their, grandparents, 2 weeks later and wanted to, self-isolate or whatever for a period before, we're very flexible about that. But giving people an office to go to and also designating the days so you didn't show up and then nobody else was there because they picked a different set of 2 days, than you did, I thought was kind of immediately obvious to us for our culture that it was the right thing to do.
And how is that working out for you? What has been the reception? What pros, cons of it?
So like I said, I think that people were relieved to be in an office. Mm-hmm. It was particularly important for younger people who hadn't, who could benefit really from both mentorship and just an ability to kind of like see the bigger picture, and where a lot of what they were doing, fit in to, to the bigger picture of the organization. And it's been working out really well. So actually right now I'm in the lovely Hilton Hotel behind me at our sales meeting with our sales team of about, 20 or so people. And last night, because I knew we were doing this webinar, I kind of verified with people. I said, hey, I'm going to get up in front of everybody and represent that, like, this is great. Is that true? And yeah, people are like really are appreciative of an office to go to, and also like the flexibility that, if they have errands to run or are not feeling it that day, then they can also work from home. They can have days where they don't need to be in the office. So I think that we're going to keep to this policy for the foreseeable future.
I also thought it was interesting because you have 2 offices in 2 different cities, how that also helps you and other execs kind of organize your time and presence. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Yeah. So being in 2 different cities has its pros and cons. I would say the biggest, well, I'll start with con, is that not everybody's in the same place. So what we do about that is every quarter, we get the entire company together between Houston and Austin. It's actually at a camp, which we initially chose because it had a lot of outdoor space, like basically like big, like tented areas where you could get the whole, get people together, during the pandemic. And it was a really convenient setup. And so we've kind of kept doing that. So the whole company gets together, with some regular cadence, and something I think is important. I think the biggest upside of having 2 offices is that it enables us to recruit elsewhere. And so elsewhere, meaning like out of Texas, if people are able to travel. So I think that what's really hard is having a team, a situation where pretty much everybody's in office and a handful of people are not in office, because then they just feel like excluded and it's really kind of difficult to manage. But because we have this situation where it's hybrid remote, we're able to, for example, hire a sales leader who's in Denver, who commutes in for, a couple times a month. He doesn't see people very much less than the rest of us, because not everybody is in both places at the same time, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. And I had a question actually from the audience here, which was, can people opt to go in more than 2 days, or is the idea that everyone is just those 2 days?
Yeah, we actually have a lot of people who come in every day. They just like being in an office. They like the fact that it sets a boundary for them. This is work, this is not work. Mm-hmm. I'd say about half the people come in daily, and then the other half come in on the 2 designated days.
Got it. And are there any rules in terms of like how you about how meetings are conducted or scheduled around that structure? In terms of like they have to be, the meetings should, like internal meetings should happen on those days, or?
Yeah, don't have any kind of formally written down policies, but certainly we are mindful to, have, well, for example, the executive meeting to take place on days where we're all together. When a leader is kind of coming from one office to the other, we have a shared calendar where they'll put that down so we can kind of make sure to, allocate time for them to spend time with people in that office that they're going into. So we are certainly mindful of people's physical locations when scheduling, things like meetings, and then also, opportunities for social interaction with the group.
Got it. Great. All right. Oh, and then here's another question for you, Yael. So I'll ask one more and then we'll move on to Tim, which was, do you have ample space to accommodate everyone on those 2 days? Like, so basically when you're thinking about, and maybe this is another topic also later on, but when in your space planning, you basically kind of assume that everyone will come in.
Yeah.
And have their own office.
Yeah. We got the offices assuming, that we would need to accommodate everybody. So we do have ample space for that.
Okay, got it. All right, thank you, Yael. It's quite interesting. Tim, maybe you can just kind of give us a little bit of kind of a story of your journey in terms of how you got to your policy and the reaction impact.
Sure. I think that my journey actually starts a little bit with my background, which is for the first part of my career, I was a fighter pilot in the Navy. And so my view of leadership and culture is very much intertwined with the way that we taught and learned about leadership in the Navy and in a fighter squadron. And so one of the things that has just always been so important to me is how do we establish and create a culture where people have bonds that go beyond transactional. And maybe it's a shortcoming of me as a leader, but I'm not aware of a way to create those types of bonds between people in a remote environment. And, I'm sure that there are people that have that capability, but one of the things that I thought would be easier was to establish a culture where people deeply care about each other and work hard for each other. By being physically present with each other. I think that a lot gets done in those water cooler conversations or in the conversations in passing before or after a meeting. The second thing that was really important to me is that at an early stage startup, things change so quickly and communication is so difficult that any barrier to communication that we can remove and any way that we can shorten feedback loops and make sure that we're iterating more quickly is something that was really important to me, especially as we scaled from 2 people in a room in Boston to 85 people here in Austin. And then the third thing that was really important to my co-founder and I was cross-functional collaboration. I think that it is possible and sometimes even better for individual contributors to work in an isolated fashion and in a remote capacity. But as soon as you need to do cross-functional collaboration, what I think is that a lot of that breaks down if you're behind a Zoom screen or if you have to schedule time for getting a question answered. So those are kind of the broad pillars of why we're pretty staunch on the in-office, in-person culture. I think that we were probably an outlier for most of the pandemic, which is we were fully in the office the entirety of the pandemic, with very few exceptions. So when we went to stage 5 in Austin, we allowed people who self-identified as being a high-risk category to work remotely. But by and large, we were 5 days a week in the office the entire pandemic. Now, a couple things about that. We had the benefit of scaling during the pandemic, so people could self-select into that. Is you came to the interview and we said, listen, this is an in-person job. If you're not okay with that, that's fine, but this is just not the company for you. And one thing that's surprising that Yael also mentioned was that the feedback that she got from her employees about going back to the office was positive. I think that there has been a popular narrative over the past 2 years that every employee wants to be fully remote, and that if you are not fully remote, you're not going to be able to recruit and retain people. Our experience has actually been very different, which is that there is a segment of the population that being in the office and having the ability to come to a office every day of the week is actually a positive. It's not a negative that we're overcoming. And I think that that has helped us with recruiting and retention. Yeah, I think that that's
yeah, that's great. It's actually very similar to one of our other portfolio companies, Atmosphere, who also is kind of bleeding edge at the time of really kind of trying to get back everyone back into the office. And they grew by hundreds of employees over the last year and made that part of the screening. Essentially, they wanted to build a culture where that was valued, where face-to-face interaction was something that people seeked out. And basically that was part of the hiring process, and they were able to kind of select in to that. I did feel that a lot of that was also kind of maybe worked because of the demographics of their employee base. They have a lot of inside sales and other folks that tend to be younger. And so I was also curious if you're finding differences, whether it's in your current employee base or recruiting, and this is for both you, Yael, and Tim, and Scott, like, are there kind of these groups where there's a little bit of resistance to that? How do you handle exceptions? How do you hold the line on that? And either of you, if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple different avenues of that question. One is, do you make exceptions? Number two is, are there differences within the demographics? And three is, do you have particular roles that are difficult? And I'll start with the particular role, which is we have a sales role that is licensed, which reduces the ability to recruit, right? Because you have to get a national license or state license from the NMLS. And Austin is not a particular hub. And so one thing that we have found is that it looks like we're going to, and actually we did just hire a handful of people in Kansas City. And so we're moving quickly to Yael's world, where we're going to have 2 in-person offices. And so in order to expand the talent pool, it is forcing us to now open a second office in the Kansas City market. So that is, again, a con of not just being fully remote.
I think that I don't see it clustering across demographics, either by age or by, job function, like engineering versus sales. I think it's across the board, more or less, that people are happy with in-person interaction. I mean, we're human beings. I think that many years of evolution have brought us to this point, and I think that people are generally happy about it. I think it's really important to maintain flexibility. If somebody, we're very lenient with if somebody doesn't want to come in one day. If it's because, the refrigerator is getting fixed, all the way to like an illness or something significant. People are happy to come in. So it's not like we have to hammer people to actually to show up. And it's been interesting, even when interviewing, people come, candidates from other companies, they're like, wow, I haven't been in office in so long. This is so amazing. This is great. And it's just, it's actually incredible to hear that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tim, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I didn't want to go off.
Oh, I was just going to say some of the things that Tim was saying in terms of like the advantages of being in an office. So I guess maybe I have a little bit of a more moderated view than Tim. Like, I think it can work. Like, if God forbid we have another crazy pandemic that's like worse than this one, like, it's not like you can't do remotely. It's just that, like, if given the option, there are so many advantages to being in the office. And like things that like I found is it changes people's a priori, like having people have in-person interaction. So in other words, like if people are, communicating or collaborating on a project or whatever, and someone says something that's not 100% on, like, are you going to assume, like, give them the benefit of the doubt or like assume the worst? And when you have a connection with people, it just kind of like changes the threshold. Like, no, this is not a talking head. This is like your colleague. And so I found that to be a big benefit. Also, if things are not working well, and so someone's missing their goals, and you have to start, looking at their activity, when you can actually kind of like see what they're doing with your own eyes, and you can tell, like, is this a problem of effort? Is this a problem of skills? It's just very beneficial in that way for the benefit of an employee who's not necessarily, knocking it out of the park right away. And then also for younger people to learn. So just their ability to kind of like see all the other things that go on in the office, how people interact when visitors come, all of this. It's just an opportunity for people that they wouldn't get if they're at home.
Scott, what are you seeing? I mean, you talk to so many companies every day. I'm sure tackling this. What are you hearing here that sounds familiar or maybe different?
I mean, it runs the gamut. It really does. There's a spectrum of companies here. I feel like the smaller tech companies that rely on loyalty in both directions feel very strongly about having those folks in the office to build culture. They don't want folks at home freelancing with other groups as well, right? So that's a concern. And as the companies mature and the workforce matures, I feel like you tend to see more of this hybrid, working situation work out for both employers and employees. And I think in Austin specifically, those companies tend to gravitate toward the West Loop of 360. They tend to sort of hug the Arboretum and the 183. Those companies are more mature, their workforce is more mature. They tend to have more working parents that like to be home for soccer practices and work around kids' schedules. Downtown, whether it's sort of like South Congress or east side of downtown, you tend to get a lot of startup-y companies, younger. This town has 40% millennials as our population, which is insanely high, which really dictates the use of space. And I suspect most of those millennials are living in small little 600 square foot or less apartments. And so getting them out of the apartment and getting them into offices is a big deal. What you're seeing change is sort of the amenities, both the apartments and the office space have to sort of give in order to get people to come in, right? And so downtown, if you've got, a lot of shared space and you have sort of common areas that look like cafes, and you have places for young employees to congregate and work, and those newer buildings, newer finish outs really attract those employees. If you're walking along Congress, sort of the older buildings that haven't been remodeled are the ones sort of suffering downtown. And so downtown's absorption and occupancy is still very, very high. It's over 80%, but there's been this huge flight to quality of product. So as the new buildings are coming out of ground with all the best amenities, those are getting leased right away. And so our two largest towers, specifically in Austin, 6 in Guadalupe, which is where Meta is going, and sort of that sailboat building along Caesar that Trammell Crow is building for Google. Each of those companies are going to move 3,000 more employees into those buildings, and those buildings are still a year away from completion. So as the big towers, newest towers go up, the 5 largest tech companies in the world tend to grab those, which means the supply for younger mid-sized companies really hasn't increased a whole lot over the last 2 or 3 years. And you're going to see a real tightening of occupancy, specifically downtown and at the Domain. One thing we've learned and we've been learning over the last few years is companies want to be, generally speaking, if they have younger employees, tech employees, they want to be somewhere with walkable amenities. And so downtown has been very popular. The Domain's rents are getting pretty close to downtown rents, which is sort of insane to think about. And then buildings along corridors with walkable amenities. And so whether you're on Burnett Road or Lamar or on the east side on 6th Street or Cesar Chavez, new office buildings are going up. And that will continue to happen, and tech companies are moving there because their employees can walk out the front door, and instead of getting in a car and driving along Mopac, they can simply walk a block or two to a number of restaurants and bars. And so I think in order to get people to want to come into the office, you have to offer that, and sort of the proof is in the pudding, and you're seeing that happen pretty rapidly here in town, among other places. I'm sure Houston and Dallas is the same, but Austin is sort of front and center for tech companies, and that trend is accelerating here in town.
Great, thanks, Scott. Yeah, and later in this presentation, just for everyone, we have some data that Scott's going to walk us through that put some numbers to that I think it's quite interesting. We have some questions coming in here that I thought would be fun to address. And actually, they're both kind of similar in the sense that when you made these decisions, and Yael, you mentioned it, like you had quite so much different variation in terms of feedback you got, and you had to kind of make a unilateral decision. Did you lose staff? Did you get, was there like resistance that you had to kind of talk through? You know, did people self-select out or not?
Yeah, we didn't lose anybody over it. I think that the key thing is to just make sure that people understand that like you care about them. And the reason you're deciding to bring people back to the office is like for their benefit, not because, you know, you want to, like I said, crack the whip. And when people understand that, then they're grateful for it. And I think there's that. And then also just being flexible. I mean, we had one person that was, you know, really stressed out about being in person, which is like, okay, don't be in person. Like it made sense for that individual. And it, you know, people didn't resent it because they generally like saw the value in being in the office. And, you know, being flexible and working with people. We had another person who, I don't know, his wife was pregnant. And so he stayed home for like a month. Like, so I think that as long as people understand that what you're, you know, basically what's driving your decision-making is their best interest. And if they believe that and they trust you, then they'll go along. So we didn't lose anybody over it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Tim, yeah, the word flexibility, Yael said, kind of, I'm thinking about this, your policy of 1 day a week work from home. Is that a floating thing that anyone can choose ad hoc, or how do they signal that to others? Does that matter? Or does that cause an issue?
So just like Yael wanted everybody in on the same days, it was important for us that the work from home day was the same day so that we could have the benefits of the culture building and the collaboration on the days that everybody is in the office. And the other thing is I am very sympathetic and empathetic to the fact that avoiding the commute or being able to get deliveries, or there are lots of benefits, or even just the fact of working without interruption, that there are benefits. And so what we did is we said that Wednesdays are going to be our work from home day. And so there's a couple reasons, right? Is I don't think that, again, this depends on the demographics of your workforce and the maturity. I think that more mature workers view work from home as what it is, which is still working every bit as hard and getting your responsibilities done. I think that some of the less mature entry level workers may view work from home as a day to sit by the pool or point is we didn't want work from home to be Mondays or Fridays because we didn't want them to just turn into 3-day weekends all the time. And so we do work from home on Wednesdays. We've also given people an additional bucket of work from home that they can choose because I do think that flexibility and trust is important, but I also think that consistent rules and fair expectations across the board are really important to keeping morale high. I do think that Yael is spot on when she says that all that people care about is that they know that you care about them and that you're making decisions with their best interest in mind. But I do think that gets difficult as you scale the organization to make people understand why the decision about them may be different than the decision about somebody else. And one of the ways to avoid that kind of issue is to have clear and consistent guidelines across the workforce.
Interesting. Yeah, so I can see some different shades of gray here in terms of just, you know, your guys' style and the culture that, and then maybe some of it has to do with size too, and types of employees and number of employees.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm listening to Yael, and I think that from first principles, we agree on most everything. It's just the way that we're implementing those. And again, maybe it's different workforces, maybe it's different size, maybe it's we're different people. But I do think that it seems like we're coming from very much a similar point, which is number one, to care first and foremost about the people. And number two is to make decisions that are in their best interest.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We had another question here about, you know, traditional startup culture and, you know, what, you know, how has this impacted your ability to do that, or has it not, or, you know, has it changed anything in terms of what you would traditionally think of what you're trying to achieve as a startup?
What do you mean by Is that ping pong tables and cold brew, or what do we mean?
This is a question from the audience here, but it's like, how do you all think about building, quote, startup culture, which has historically seemed the key to success vis-a-vis back to office strategies? So just so you know, does it impact culture? I guess a lot of this is about being together, but
yeah, I mean, I think that it's the number one reason, right? Is I think that startup culture is incredibly important because the truth of a startup is that the default state for a startup is to die, and you have to earn the right to exist every single day, and there's going to be massive ups and downs, right? My co-founder and I, Lewis, we sometimes joke that at a startup every day feels like an existential crisis, and then at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, you zoom out and you realize that you've accomplished some great things. But to get through those days that feel like existential crises, I think being connected to the people around you is the only way that you do it. And that's, again, back to my first point. The reason that we're in the office is to build those bonds that go beyond being transactional. One thing that's incredibly important to us is that we give people a chance to do meaningful work that they're fulfilled by. And meaningful, fulfilling work is not always easy. It's not always fun, but it comes from doing hard work that's worth doing with people that you care about. Those are, at least in my experience, all of the things that I have derived meaning and fulfillment from in my life.
got it. Yeah, we did get a clarification that yes, startup meaning closeness, family, all for one, all in. So yes, Tim, exactly what you're saying. That's great. Wonderful. All right, let's keep moving on here. We do have another poll here that really has to do with kind of how are people thinking about their office space. And so if we could get that poll up and running here. And the question is, what changes do you expect in your physical office space? And in this one, you can select all that apply. So, you may be doing more than one of these things. There's been a lot of discussion about, hey, we have to change the way we do things to get people to come back. I'm hearing from the panel, though, it doesn't sound like maybe it's these kinds of things, and it might be more cultural in nature, but it'll be interesting to see what people are doing. So I think that's probably enough time. I know it's a long list, but maybe we could go look at the results here next. This will pop up. Okay, interesting. So there is looks like there is a movement towards at least 43% of people think there'll be fewer assigned desks and more floating desks, more meeting rooms, more common space. But these are kind of more like in the minority, not the majority here, but still people do think there's going to be some movement in these areas. That's interesting. But I'm hearing, I think I heard from Yael and Tim, did you adopt any of these things, or is it more just from a physical space standpoint, pretty much the same in terms of how you think about planning and arranging things?
Yeah, I think that it is definitely and has been and continues to be important to balance the reason we all went remote in the first place, which is concerns over people's physical health, with all of the benefits of being in an office. And so I think that when the pandemic was raging, definitely finding ways to be outdoors, and getting people together, and we accomplished that, like I said, meeting with the entire company at a giant camp, really making sure that people understand that we are prioritizing their physical health. If we had a couple of COVID cases in the office, just closed it down for a week and cleaned and made sure everybody tested before coming back in. So certainly being really mindful of that and making sure that people understand, like I mentioned before, that we really do have their best interest in mind. I think that we've spent a lot of time talking about the myriad of benefits of being in office in terms of collaboration, culture, and bonds and leadership and all of this. And as a result, having people in office, when they're there, we haven't had any like major structural changes to make to the offices themselves versus the way it was before.
Yeah, and I did joke about cold brew and ping pong tables, but we do have all of those things, right? I think that while they're sometimes the butt of the joke in popular culture. I do think that there's a reason that it's important to provide the snacks and the food and the happy hours and the activities that people can decompress around, that they can be a place for those accidental conversations to happen. And so, as we have scaled and continued to bring people in, we've continued to provide team offsites and to do the weekly happy hours and the snacks and all of the hygiene factors that go with a startup.
Got it. And Yael, for those 2 days that you're having people come in, are you doing extra special things those days, like things for lunches or like, I mean, what's the thing of those 2 days?
So we do bring in lunch for each office once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually interesting. So Scott was saying that people wanted, to be near walkable amenities. I think that a lot of people probably say that they want it, but also are much more happy when you bring food into the office. So that's been our experience. We are actually in walkable locations. We're in Rice Village in Houston and in East Austin, in the middle of a lot of stuff. But regardless, we bring in lunches. People really appreciate that. And they like to pick the restaurants as well. We let different people pick it different times. And then we have, stocked fridges with snacks and whatnot.
Well, I'm sure 100-degree weather contributes some of that.
Excellent point, Eric. Excellent point.
So yeah, that's great. That's good to understand. So there's another question coming in here. I think one of you mentioned the importance of maybe doing your manager one-on-ones in person. Are there other things that you try to direct towards the office days specifically? Like, so when everyone's in office, just when you think about the cadence of the company or the business or how teams are operating, are there things that you're going to try to push for those days?
Yeah, I think important meetings that happen, not all the time, definitely schedule those for being in office. And then also, given that we have, people in 2 places, Houston and Austin, basically have people go, commute from one to the other when those things happen. Like, for example, the kickoffs of the sprints for product that happens, every 6 weeks or so. We'll have people come in office for that. And we have an all hands meeting on Fridays where we do kind of like a recap of the week. We actually do those remotely because people are in both locations, and just a 30-minute kind of like what went well, what didn't kind of thing during the week.
Oh, that's interesting, because that's the end of a week thing. So you do that remotely.
We do that on Fridays, and everybody logs onto a big Zoom and such.
Interesting.
Yeah. We also, when we were remote, I don't want to knock remote. I mean, I know a lot of people in the poll said that they were fully remote. Like, I think it can be done. I just think in office is better if possible. But, during the pandemic, we had success with the Airbnb experiences, different activities that we've done together. I think it just requires an, effort. And then also, I think doing that over a sustained period of time can become challenging. And so to try to kind of like intersperse like opportunities for people to be in person, even if they're remote, I think is important. But I think it seems like both Tim and I are fairly in-person advocates. I don't think that it's impossible to effectively run a company remotely.
Got it.
So I agree. We had a partner at Y Combinator who talked to us about this pre-pandemic, about remote work, because we were dual-sided. And one of the things that he said to us is that doing this remote is possible, but it's like playing the game on hard mode, right? It's like there's so many things that are already hard. And again, I think that lots of people can do it effectively. Maybe I'm just not one of them. I think that had we been remote with the challenges in our particular industry, I don't know that we would have been successful over the past 3 years. But I do think that it's possible, but it just makes things harder in my mind.
Yeah. And it sounds like both of you have been able to recruit the people you want to recruit at various levels with this essentially.
Yeah, I think it's actually been a good filtering mechanism for us. I'm sure that there are plenty of talented people that we're missing out on. But I think that the worst thing you can do is hire the wrong people, as opposed to not. It's much worse to hire the wrong person than it is to not fill a position. And it's one of the filtering mechanisms that I think has helped us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that in terms of recruiting, it enables us to get a person who lives, in a major city that is not Houston or Austin, that has flexibility to commute, a couple
Right.
times
So
a month,
your model
we
is a little
wouldn't
bit
have-
different. Yeah. So it sounds like your model provides that flexibility
Yeah.
for out of city employees, essentially remote employees, and they can kind of telecommute more. Basically travel once in a while.
Yeah.
More effectively.
Yeah. I mean, I think that for, many of our employees, the vast majority are either, salespeople or software developers. And then, you have the occasional, head of sales, and you're looking for like a really specific profile. And so it enables us to kind of like expand a search for somebody like that, or head of marketing, where you want like, a really specific long list of qualifications to expand that beyond Texas, where that wouldn't have been possible, or would have been very non-ideal if we were completely 100% in office.
Got it. That's an important distinction there. Great. All right. So I wanted to use some of the time that we have left here for Scott to run through some really interesting data that he has. He Elevate focuses on Austin and Texas at large. And so they have a lot of really specific information that I felt the audience here would benefit from. So Scott, you want to kind of walk us through some of these numbers?
Yeah, sure. Really, I just want to point out, how small Austin is relative to Houston and Dallas. I mean, we're barely over 2 million people here in town. Austin generally doubles every 20 years, and forecasters and demographers are saying the same thing. Will double over the next 20 years. But the amount of activity level, I mean, this was a sleepy college town in the mid 90s with 700, 800,000 people. And so we've grown up a lot. You can just see by sales volumes, like how Austin's already sort of competing with Houston and on par with almost Dallas. The most expensive buildings in town are trading at all-time highs. You have office buildings trading at over $800 a foot downtown, which is insane. Our downtown rental market is top 5 in the entire country, competing with Manhattan and San Francisco. You wouldn't think that, but when you're paying extremely high land prices, and then on top of that, with construction costs being where they are, and then you're getting Fortune 100 credit signing leases, this is the end result, is it becomes very, very expensive. And so even under construction, at the end of Q1, we had 400,000 square feet of office under construction, which is crazy, but you also have a lot in the pipeline as well. So it's almost a land grab. You're going to see cranes up downtown for the next 3 or 4 years, and every parking lot that is available won't be around in 3 or 4 years. And so and now you're even getting groups going in and taking 2-story buildings down and building towers. So it's going to be a bit of a frenzy, but miraculously, like I previously mentioned, like these towers are getting taken almost before delivery, which is, I'm drinking the Austin Kool-Aid and I'm sharing that with everybody on this call, but we take it for granted because we've been living here for many years, but like the rest of the country is not like this. This is kind of crazy. There's some darlings of the market, Nashville being one, and a few others, but Austin has been very, very expensive. On the other hand, in Houston, like there are, the energy corridor in Houston, and there are office buildings in North Houston that, you can buy for $40 or $50 a foot today. I mean, granted, you might be sitting on those empty buildings for several years until you have enough tenant velocity to lease those up. But Houston's office market has sort of struggled over the last few years, and will continue to do so until you get a lot more, startup companies and a more of a diversified tenant base there. It's still so focused on the energy sector. There's a lot of office still available for lease. But
as someone who lived in Dallas, I have to point out, I mean, that's also incredible numbers on the Dallas side. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of expansion and growth happening there in the suburbs, I believe.
There is, and a lot of the major publicly traded companies that are leaving California are choosing Dallas because of the demographics. There's a much larger sort of blue collar middle class in Dallas and in Houston than there is in Austin. And we can go, this is a completely different topic, but we can go down the rabbit hole of talking about the lack of middle class in Austin. It's a very per capita, it's very high. Our average home prices are over 600 now, close to 600. And then you have the service hospitality business. And it's like this barbell demographic here in town, which is challenging, right? Like we all feel it every time we go to a restaurant or you try and get a contractor to come to your house, right? Like good luck, it's just very difficult. But that's probably another call, Kirk.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that topic for sure.
Yeah. But I also tell you that there are over 200 companies that Opportunity Austin is pursuing that have already visited Austin. So like pre-pandemic, it was 130. Then it sort of slowed down during the pandemic. But there are still over 200 companies looking to relocate to Austin today, and that number is as recent as 2 or 3 weeks ago from Opportunity Austin. So it's not going to slow down, and the pipeline from California and Illinois and New York will continue, because whether interest rates go up or don't, or it's still Texas and Austin specifically, still such a great place to do business that I think you'll continue to see a flood of folks come here, which of course directly and indirectly looks is driving all of this real estate data, right? The average rent per square foot. So you can have the high watermark downtown Austin is the Indeed Tower. You can be at almost $80 gross downtown today. Here's a quick snapshot of the map and just sort of where gross rents are and how they differ. As you get outside of downtown into the hill country, your rents are dropping. I'd say Loop 1 and 360 and along North 183, it's far more affordable. Walkable amenities are almost non-existent up there. You still got to get your car. And a lot of the groups we deal with, mostly tech companies like the ones on the call, are all wanting to locate to places like downtown in the Domain or along the corridors. And so that's where you're going to see more of the new buildings, and that's where you're going to see the higher rents and the parking structures, and having, if you're getting charged for parking, and it's just sort of the way it is. There's a flight to quality, and I think that will continue. But yeah, this is just a quick map of where pricing is. And two things to point out is just how expensive the CBD is, and the fact that the Domain and North Austin is pretty closely tied to that number as well. So
yeah. Great. Well, I think we're coming to the end here. I actually don't see any more open questions. I think we tackled pretty much all of them throughout here. So if you're in the audience and want to shoot one out real quick, please do. Otherwise, we'll be shutting this down and saying goodbye to everyone. And just, I wanted to thank all of you for participating, all the panelists here. I know you all are very busy and have really kind of helped us understand what works, it sounds like, which is exciting, that there are there are solutions out there that actually work, and it doesn't cause too much drama, which is great to hear. And then for everyone on the audience, thank you for joining us. I have to do my plug here. We have a great startup toolkit. Please visit it on our website here. If you're getting started as a company, you'll find a lot that will hopefully help you using tools that we basically have developed over 17 years, just working with a lot of startups, and I think you'll find them helpful. So thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.